Welcome to another episode of Conversation and Cocktails with your host, me, Lenny B. In this episode, we speak to Drew Stone. Drew Stone is a director, producer, and a musician. Directed such films as All Ages, Boston Hardcore documentary, New York Hardcore Chronicles, and Who the Fuck Is That Guy, the Michael Alago story, as well as directing and producing tons and tons of music videos. Me and Drew sat down, had a great talk about music, film, art, and growing up in New York. So, without further ado, roll that fucking footage. So, Drew, how you doing?
I'm good. It's good to be back in Forest Hills.
Yeah, you were saying that you were born out here.
Yeah, I was born in Booth Memorial Hospital, which is now called what?
North Shore LIJ, I think.
North Shore, right? And so I'm born in Forest Hills, Queens, and I lived here for a couple years before my family moved on. So actually, Drew Stone, born and raised in Forest Hills, Queens.
Home of the Ramones.
Home of the Ramones, and you know, a lot. Did you grow up out here?
No, I grew up out in Manhattan,
Yeah,
Yorkville.
So,
I was thinking how we were going to start this off, and I had the other day I was on Facebook, and I just went back to one of my earliest childhood memories I could think of, and it was the 1977 blackout.
mm-hmm.
You were about, what, in your mid-teens when that happened?
Yeah, I was 15 or 16.
What did you get into during the blackout?
I didn't get into anything because I was away at summer camp.
Really?
So I was out of the mix.
Oh, you missed it then.
I was away at summer camp, but you know, I think part of it is that you know, I grew up in New York City in the 70s, and I'm actually working on a book, slowly working on a book, which is basically it's called my life in well, I'm sorry. It's about growing up in New York in the 70s, and it's about being part of the sort of like the Generation X. You know, sort of. I grew up after the 60s, and before this, you know, before the 80s, sort of like in this void. You know, the 60s was over. The MTV thing didn't hit. New York was in decay. Culturally, it was just sort of a strange place to grow up. So I grew up in New York City in the mid-70s. And there was a lot of, I mean, the blackout was sort of like a symptom of it.
Yeah.
But, you know, the subway was in severe decay. There was a lot of crime. It was a dangerous place. And I was a kid, like, running the streets back then. So it was a very fun time to be growing up in New York City. I mean...
Well, that was back in the day of like bad butterfly collars, fucking mescaline and Quaaludes, things that they don't make anymore.
Yeah, I mean, sure. It was a time of, you know, I just worked on a chapter in the book called "Dog Shit Everywhere," and one thing I do remember about growing up in New York in the mid-70s is it was before they passed the Pooper Scooper law. So as kids playing in the street, there was dog shit everywhere. And you would constantly, like, step in dog shit.
Yeah.
This was a constant. Like, you know, it was constant. There was dog shit everywhere. And as kids riding skateboards, I remember slaloming in and out of it, going down the sidewalk, and we would play in the streets, and there was just dog shit everywhere. And then when they passed the Pooper Scooper law, we thought it was absolutely fucking hilarious that adults had to, like, start picking up dog shit, and we would just, it would be like, for kids, it was like the funniest thing. Like, you have to pick up that dog shit, you know? I mean, you know, dog shit was everywhere. We used to, you know, in the winter when it was frozen, we would throw it at each other. I mean, that was just sort of like, you know, the world that we lived in, you know?
It's funny you said when I was a kid, because you actually moved into my old neighborhood, Yorkville, for a time being, and over by Carl Schultz Park, right before the FDR went into the tunnel.
Absolutely.
It's about 91st Street. There was a grading that used to be there, you know, right above the FDR. Yeah. And me and my friends would grab dog shit with, you know, newspaper, shove it in the grating at cars coming, you know, stuck in traffic. Like, you know, it's like, it was a weird thing. Like, why are we playing with shit?
Well, so we both grew up in the same neighborhood, basically. Yeah. And, you know, one thing about, you know, being a young juvenile delinquent, you know, growing up there, I remember is, talk about Carl Schurz Park.
Yeah.
But that was built over an existing street underneath it.
Yeah.
And as kids, we figured out how to get underneath there. And there was still a cobblestone street down there.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like, this was before everything was like gated off and everything. And it was like really cool. As kids, it was like something out of like Planet of the Apes, We climbed down there, and it was like an old cobblestone street. And
Yeah, that's over by 82nd Street, 10 Gracie Square.
Right.
Yeah, I know exactly. We
Right.
used to play down
And-
there too.
Yeah, and so that was just like a big fun thing about sort of being a kid in that neighborhood. And Carl Schurz Park was a park like we used to sleigh ride over by Gracie Mansion,
Yep.
and that was like our world. Like growing up, Carl Schurz Park was
Oh, yeah.
was my world because back then parents. I mean, I don't know about parents, but we I had a younger brother like and I grew up in a single with a single mother. We had full run, and where I lived, you could leave the building and never cross the street. You would just go down the block onto the promenade down to Carl Schurz Park. So we were allowed to go out. We would never cross the street.
Yeah.
And we could it was a lot of acreage there.
Oh, yeah.
To cover. And and I ended up at a young age sort of like getting enrolled into sort of like, I don't want to use the word gang, but they were like the 82nd Street gang, and I sort of got I got recruited. Basically they came up to me one day in school and said, one of the kids said, my cousin, she really likes you, and you could either go out with her or we're gonna beat the shit out of you. So I ended up,
Yeah.
forced into that role, and then sort of running with these kids. It was kid stuff,
Vandalism.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mischief and breaking into cars and throwing rocks at cars off the FDR
Yeah,
and stealing shit from the supermarket and fireworks and that kind of stuff.
Oh, fireworks was a big thing, especially when the guy with the list would come around.
Yeah, right. Yeah, what do you
What do you want?
Yeah.
Ooh,
you,
you're selling M80s and Blockbusters.
Right,
It's like,
right.
what am I going to get? And nowadays, the M80s and Blockbusters they make, guys will come around with
Yep,
them
yep.
occasionally. Now and they're like, this isn't, get the fuck out of here,
Yeah, and we used to have like fire bottle rocket fights.
Yep.
Like 5 guys against 5 guys, like going across the street. I remember one kid getting hit right between the eyes with a bottle rocket, and it blew up just as it hit him, and just he had this like black burn mark between his eyes for a while. But it was young stuff growing up in New York City in the '70s, and it was a really sort of vibrant place, but still as a kid, a somewhat could be a scary place.
Yeah.
Because I remember hanging out there and actually there's always creeps and stuff. I remember like some creep trying to pick me up and touch me and stuff like that. I mean, that was part of being a kid in New York City then, like
Yeah.
creeps like that, and like running home like and stuff like that.
Well, you
know?
definitely had to have your head on a swivel. You had to have a certain
Yeah.
sense of street smarts about you.
Absolutely.
Or you weren't going to grow up to have, kids of your own or whatnot.
Right.
I mean, first time I think I got mugged was in Carl Schurz Park. First time I got my bike stolen, it was in Carl Schurz Park.
Yep.
Because, I mean,
Right.
you still dealt with the predator aspect growing up. They didn't give a fuck if you were 13 or 12,
Right, and we mentioned this before. Is that I went to Wagner Junior High School after I went to PS 158, and my friend Mark Levine, my best friend, who my oldest friend, who lived right around the corner there, tells a story about how we got mugged our first day at junior high school at Wagner. Like we went out for lunch.
Wagner was tough, though.
Wagner was
Wagner
tough.
was tough.
Yeah, we got into it a lot at Wagner, and we got mugged our first day of junior high school, and that was,
It's like, welcome to high school, welcome to junior high kid. Where's your fucking money?
yeah, it was fucking junior high school. How fucking old are you in junior high school? 15?
If that, yeah.
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 Our first day, we
That's
went out
crazy.
at lunchtime and got totally mugged. So and then after that, you sort of have to adjust to, But people have a tendency to romanticize New York City in that era.
Yeah.
And, you know, they focus on, oh, it was a vibrant place, and the arts, and there was music, and you know what? There was a downside to it, too.
Of course.
And it was a dangerous place. It was a violent place. It was an ugly place, a lot of it, you know? So, you know, people, I think, in retrospect, sort of romanticize it, you know?
Well, it was funny. The other day I was just looking at death tolls throughout the years for New York City, and I was like, all right, because people always talk about how crime is down. Crime is down to a certain degree. Murders are down.
Right.
I think certain crimes have picked up, like, you know, Grand Theft Auto, B&E, and the highest year we had, I mean, minus obviously 2001 with 9/11, was 1990. There was 2,200 murders.
Yeah.
You know, and you look back at that and you go, holy fuck. And I remember I was in high school at the time and just looking at, you know, every morning I just read the statistics, like 10 people shot last night, 5 people shot last night, you know.
Yeah, and also there's something else. We don't see it in New York City anymore. But remember, we used to see people like nodding out, like just hunched over, just in super, super heroin nods. And, you know, there was a lot of heroin in the street, and it was open in the street. Like, people would just be like nodding out, laid out, hunched over. So there was always this sort of like, you know, people smoking angel dust. There was always this sort of like, you know, drug culture that sort of permeated the street life in New York City back then.
Well, I mean, that's still kind of prevalent now because now you have the opioid problem.
Right.
And it's, you know, when that becomes unaffordable for someone, it's now cheaper to buy a bag of smack.
But what you don't see is people literally in the street, like,
not as much as you used
like
to.
nodding out like you used to. We
No,
used to
not-
see that a lot.
Yeah, no, guys standing up and
Yeah,
with the
right.
fucking lean,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, all that. I haven't seen that. I think nowadays, if the cops see that, they'll arrest the person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back then, well, it was kind of funny you say about cops back then. Back then, a cop, what people don't understand is back then a cop would fucking rap you one with the stick and say, get the fuck out of here or I'll take you home to your parents, which, take me to jail. Please don't take me home to my fucking parents.
Well, that's the thing about, I think, another thing that's changed is I always felt that it's different now about, of course, I mean, a lot of things are, but about the police force now is, back then, to a certain extent, you could reason with the police.
Yeah. Well, they were almost neighborhood guys.
And they were older guys, too. It was
Yeah.
the older generation. Like,
Well, that's a beat cop, too.
Right,
You know,
right.
they would go around, they would know your parents, they
Right.
would know who you were.
Right.
And they'd be like, oh, you're getting into fucking trouble. And, you know, they'd crack you one occasionally. And,
Right.
And it would be for your, technically, they looked at it as
well,
they're hitting
you
you
could
for
actually
your own good.
you could actually talk to them and reason with them.
Yeah.
Nowadays, as soon as you say something, you're a wise ass, you know, this and that, and it just goes bad. So that's one thing I remember from that era is, although we were, you know, delinquents and troublemakers, there was times when I did get in trouble where, you know, the police were, you know, you could sort of reason with them.
Yeah.
You know, it was a different world, you know?
Well, it's kind of like when I was a kid. I remember, like, you know, when we used to shoot off fireworks over by my place over on the FDR Drive, the cops would know my dad, like, hey, Lenny. And they'd throw, like, 2 grocery bags. I was like, yeah, we took these from some kids down the block.
I remember a place that was a spot that was very close to where you lived. It was on 90th and 1st. It was a bodega. And you would go into the back, and there was a fake shelving unit, and you could get around the shelving unit. And behind that was a plexiglass window, and you would slide money underneath, and you could buy like nickel bags and dime bags of pot. And we called it 90th. And I guess it was between 90th and 91st and 1st Avenue, 2 or 3 blocks from where you lived, right? And that was there for years. And those years were, that was like, you know, in the mid 80s. And there's a funny story that somebody reminded me of some of the Boston hardcore guys, because we used to come down from Boston in 2 vans for A7 shows and stuff like that. There was the Al Baril SSD control van, which was the straight edge van, right? And then there was the Drew Stone, the red van, which was sort of like the no edge van, you know, where we would, you know, we'd smoke weed and drink, and you know, nobody was like shooting dope or anything, but you know, so you had like the guys in Al's van, which was like Al, Dave Smalley, you know, those dudes, you know, blah blah blah, and then you had the guys in my van, which, you know, was sort of like the other guys, right? You know, the yin and the yang. And then someone reminded me recently, and this is great when people remind you this stuff, gives you back your memories.
Yeah.
Somebody said, man, I'll never forget that time after a show in New York. Both vans were caravanning up First Avenue. Because we would fucking go to the we would come down 4 hours from Boston and go to the A7, like SSD Control would play or something, and they'd be done at 4, 5, 6 in the morning, and then we would get in the vans and drive back to Boston.
Yeah.
It was crazy. So he said, and it was Andy Strahan who played in DYS. He said to me, I'll never forget that time that we were caravanning up First Avenue, and you stopped, and we stopped with you, and you came to the van, and to the straight edge van, and said, come on, you got to see this. And I brought these guys into this bodega and showed them, like, yo, this is New York, like, check this out. And you go in and you go behind the thing, and we bought weed, and those straight edge dudes never forgot that. Like, he didn't. It was, and you know, it's one of those memories that I forgot, but it was really precious, you know, to have it back. Like there's certain things that like I think culturally are just so important that, listen, you straight edge guys need to see this, and then, you know, you never forgot it.
That was one question I was gonna actually ask you guys, because you went to college up in Emerson, right?
Yeah, I went to Emerson College in 1981 to study acting. Yeah.
To study acting. We'll get into the filmmaking and the acting in a second, but I always wondered, is like, all right, well, you're hanging around with, you know, in the Boston scene, which was, you know, I don't want to say, I don't have a great knowledge of it. I only know what I've read out of books, but, you know, they always make it out to be some sort of, like, you know, big straight edge fucking place. You know, and then you find out later on, like, you know, Springer would be at SSD Control's, you know, rehearsals, going upstairs, smoke a joint, and go right back down and shit like that.
With me?
Not with you. Not with you. Maybe.
I'm being sarcastic.
Don't incriminate yourself now. But I always wondered, like, you know, being someone, you know, I was wondering, did you fall into line, or you were just doing your own fucking thing and just...
No, it was, look, coming from New York City and going up to Emerson, drugs and alcohol were part of the culture.
Yeah.
That as a teenager, before I went up to Boston at 18 years old, I grew up with. So in New York, everybody was smoking pot and drinking and experimenting with other drugs. So when I went up to Emerson, and I fell in with the original sort of Boston hardcore crew, the SSD Control crew, my first hardcore show was SSD Control in the summer of 1981, and I fell in. It was a very small scene back then too. You know, it started very small, but that was about the same time that you know, the whole DC straight edge thing. You know, the song Straight Edge, you know, from Minor Threat, and so we started picking up on that, and you know, those guys were really into it, and I was, you know, part of that crew, and, you know, I kind of gave it a shot. But on the other hand, what was confusing was that we loved the Bad Brains, and we hung out with the Bad Brains.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm from New York City, and I like smoking weed, and so it was sort of like I felt a little more connected with smoking grass with, like, the Bad Brains.
Yeah.
Than I did with, like, being totally abstinent, you know? I was totally abstinent for a bit, but also for me personally, I was a freshman in college.
Yeah.
So, and I was living in the dorm. And there was a lot of pretty girls, and everybody liked to party, and so I had sort of like that life, and then I'd go hang out with my hardcore friends. But I will say this, look, you know, I know through the shifting sands of time, you know, the Boston hardcore scene, the straight edge thing is looked upon as being very militant, and, you know, I hung with those guys, I rolled with those guys. I was thanked on the first SSD Control record, you know, but nobody ever stepped to me as far as, you know, what I was doing, and look, I think it wasn't like out in the open. It wasn't like, oh, you guys are straight in, you know. So I think people sort of respected, you know, our spaces, you know.
So it wasn't. They weren't like militant towards you. Did they? Or did you keep it quiet from them, or they sort of knew what was going on?
Well, I think that was part of it. I think the straight edge guys sort of had their clique,
Yeah.
and I was part of that for a while. But there was also a very dark side to the Boston hardcore scene back then. There was a contingent of people that were doing hard drugs.
Yeah.
And they were, there was a whole nother sort of world that developed. You sort of had your straight edge guys, and Al from SSD Control, and Choke, Jack Kelly, Negative Effects, and later Slapshot, Dave Smalley, and a bunch of other guys. But I think eventually the yang to the yin started growing and getting bigger, because teenage kids like to drink,
yeah.
and party, and so a dark side sort of developed, and that, I think that contingent actually got out there, and look, SSD Control was Al's sort of vehicle, but Springer smoked and drank, and I don't want to mention other names of other people in the band, but they smoked grass every now and then too. I mean, just because you smoke grass or drink doesn't mean you're a fucking dope fiend.
No.
So there was some of that, but teenage kids, man. I mean, we loved smoking pot, and we loved the Bad Brains,
Yeah. So.
and like so there was a part of it. So, but nobody ever got like super like weird with me, like you need to you anybody fucking came to me like, you need to do this. Go fuck yourself,
Yeah, because the way it's always portrayed in books and what you kind of suss out from things is
right.
that they were like really militant and they were going to kick your fucking ass and blah blah blah. Same thing with the DC thing, you hear that, and then you hear that about the New York straight edge scene, which depending on who you talk to, it was either the biggest thing since sliced bread or just another part of a scene.
Yeah.
And everyone again has a different opinion on that, which like I've talked to like Tommy Carroll from Straight Ahead. We grew up together. He grew up in the building in front of me. So
that's right. That's right.
I've known him since
right.
we were fucking little kids running around, and he would say, "It's like, dude, it's like no one gave a fuck about the straight edge thing at first, and like all of a sudden it blew up, but it blew up on its own separate thing, and you still had Sick of It All doing their thing. You still had Breakdown doing their thing. You still had Show Terror doing their thing." And I guess, it comes down to revisionist history, of course.
Yeah.
There has been a bit of revisionist history over the years with how things are portrayed, like the Revelation bands. People make that to be like, it was fucking the biggest thing in the world.
Right.
And then you find out, it's like, they had one Sunday a month.
Well, I think it's a bit summarized in the New York Hardcore Chronicles film.
Yeah.
When Roger Moret from Agnostic Front is talking about the early scene and saying it was 30 people. It was 30 people.
Well, that's how almost every scene started. Like,
Right.
DC started off with
That's
like
right.
30 people.
That's
it was
right.
like Ian MacKay and his boys.
Right.
Up in Boston, it was Al and his guys.
Right, but I think me, like yourself,
Yeah.
obviously, a collector,
Yeah.
and like, and we love this kind of stuff,
course.
and like we're, I was a comic book collector, I was a baseball card collector, I collected records, and being a collector and a lover of history by nature.
Oh yes.
Right. So we like to look, we like to understand that and its community and culture.
Yes.
And we like to, and that's basically what my films are about.
Yeah.
Is community and culture, and there's a currency to that for us. Yeah.
Well, I like to question the answers.
Yeah.
Just because you tell me one thing, it's like, all right, and I've heard the stock things over and over again. Like,
Right.
well, why is it this way?
Yeah.
And then you ask somebody else, why is it this way? You ask the same questions. Sometimes you get 20 different answers. But it's kind of like the news in the media today. You can watch 20 different things. The truth is in there somewhere. You kind of have to weave through it and find the same connecting fucking thing.
Well, I think, look, my time spent in Boston and being a part of that original Boston hardcore scene was really, really special, and it was amazing. I was there right when it hit. I was right there in the room right when it hit. I mean, the first show I went to in the summer of '81 was SSD Control's third show. There was maybe 15 or 20 people there. It was a very exciting time to be a part of something like that.
Oh, imagine.
it was really inspiring as a teenager, and of course, you know, it's I've taken it with me into my adult life, but it was a really great time, and you know, I was in Boston for only 2 years, you know, and because I went to Emerson College in Boston to study acting, but I got into this music scene, and it was so vibrant and so exciting that it was very hard for me to focus on school. And certain things weren't making sense to me. Like, here I am, a part of this incredibly exciting, you know, cultural movement, and I need to focus up on, you know...
Well, it's again, it's pulling you one way, it pulls you the other way, and it's like, fuck, I'm conflicted on what I should do.
Yeah.
And then, you know, at that point, did you join the High and the Mighty?
No, at that point, when it came to an end,
Yeah.
basically, so I left college, and I kind of had a job at a record store in Boston, and I was in a band in Boston called the Mighty C.O.s, you know, which was, you know, just the first hardcore band I was in, and that ended, and I was just sort of up there with no band, you know, working sort of like a Mickey Mouse job at a record store, and it was just time to come back to New York. And I came back to New York to start working, and to start working in the film business.
What was your first job in the film business?
It was always
Running?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was always. I worked in a movie equipment rental house here in Woodside, Queens, and I learned how to fix equipment.
Oh.
Like, so my first jobs were, you know, driving a truck and fixing equipment, and you know, I learned how to, you know, fix lights, and you know, I really started at the bottom. I started fixing equipment, driving trucks, being a production assistant, being a third grip, a third gaffer, and just basically, you know, worked my way up in the film business, which at the time was very feudal.
Yeah.
You know, it was, you had to know someone to get into the business, and which I did. You know, my father was a film director, and so job always meant, you know, for me, something in the film business, and that's how it started, and then you know, there's that whole story. So I left Boston in 1983 and came back to New York City, and I had to start working, and you know, really, you know, what job meant back then for me was something in the film business, and so I started working in a movie equipment rental house here in Queens, and I learned fixing equipment, driving trucks, really the gritty, really the fucking, the grimy shit. You know, counting sandbags, you know, like really, you know.
Hey kid, go get the Teamster some coffee.
Doing deliveries, van deliveries in the city. So I came back, and one of the first things I did was I wanted to start another band. So I recruited some of the guys I grew up with in the Bronx, and I started the High and the Mighty. And the High and the Mighty started playing the A7, and we would play the A7 a lot. And that's where I mean, I knew I met these guys before that, but you know, that's where I really sort of, you know, got into the mix here in New York. You know, Ray Bees was the doorman, Jimmy Gestapo was the DJ, Doug Holland was the bartender. That's where I really started, you know, kind of hanging out with Roger Moret and Vinny Stigma, and just getting to know, you know, that whole crew. And when I was in the, and Harley Flanagan, and while I was in the High and the Mighty, we played with probably might be the Cro-Mags' first show, or one of their first shows. One of the first shows. This is when Eric Casanova was singing.
Yes.
I think I saw every Cro-Mags show with Eric Casanova singing.
Really?
I think I did. I think there must have been 2 or 3 or 4 of them. But I mean, I remember the Cro-Mags with Eric Casanova singing. That whole thing, and so what happened was that as I was working in the film business, at a certain point, I was a stage manager on a stage on the Upper West Side of New York, where, you know, you're a stage manager and different people come onto the stage and you're the liaison, and all that. And my boss said to me, anytime you can rent any of the equipment on the stage outside the building, I'll split it with you. So I started this little thing where I had the van. I'd fill the van up with equipment and rent it outside the building, and my boss would split it with me. So at a certain point, I made enough money, and I started my company, Stone Films NYC. I started a little production company. And my brother would come to town, and he would need a few lights, and I'd throw it in, or so-and-so, hey, we're doing a little shoot, a couple lights, a few stands, a few sandbags, and, here's a few $100. And I managed to save my ducats, and I incorporated Stone Films NYC.
What year was this about?
This was this was a little bit later in the 80s, and a little bit later in the 80s. So, I mean, and at that point, just musically, at that point, I already joined Antidote. There's the whole Antidote crossover. Antidote, the High and Mighty would play shows together. I got close with Nunzio. They split with their original singer, and after we played in DC together, and I ended up joining, and so I was an Antidote there. And then, while all that was happening, I was a stage manager. So then at a certain point, Paris Mayhew, who was the guitar player in the Cro-Mags, came to me and said, hey, this band's asking me to do a video for them. Would you like to produce it through your company? Do you think you could do that? They want me to direct the video. I don't know how to. I need a vehicle to do that. Can you be that vehicle? Right at that moment is one of those moments in time where kind of things came together, and right when he said that, I had a few bucks, and that's right at that moment I said, yeah, okay, and I had enough money to make a first payment on the insurance policy that you need to conduct business in New York City. You need $1 million insurance policy in order to, you need $1 million insurance policy, but you make that first payment, you got it.
Yeah.
I think the first payment, if I remember correctly, the first payment was $414. And then you have the fucking $1 million insurance policy, and you can go rent a camera, a 16 to 35, whatever camera, and you can get, more importantly, you can get a permit. So Paris Mayhew came to me and to do this video, and and everything came together, and it turned out that the band was Biohazard, and the video was Punishment. That's the one where everybody was coming across the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah.
So we did that video, and the video did well, and it screened on Headbangers Ball for 14 weeks in a row. Biohazard was managed by Rush Management, which was Russell Simmons, and they had a group called Onyx, and they had a song called Slam. And somebody over there had the perspective and the foresight to say, let's get the rock and roll white boys to do the Slam video. So we did the Slam video next, and Paris directed it, and I produced it through Stone Films NYC, and that video went to #1 on MTV. So when that video went to #1 on MTV, things just blew up. The phones started ringing, another Biohazard video, Shades of Grey, Typo Negative Black #1, Run DMC, Ooh, What You Gonna Do, King's X Dogman, Insane Clown Posse Chicken Hunting, you know what I mean? Onyx Shifty, Biohazard, it was just like, this went on for a while, and me working with Paris, and then eventually we split, and I do have to say, Paris Mayhew was very, very talented as a director. He was extremely focused, and he really made those videos great. So, but I was a part of it, and when we split, I continued on my own.
Yeah.
And I directed and produced Agnostic Front Gotta Go, and that did well. And the two Madball videos, Down by Law and Pride, and Marauder, Master Killer, and Sub-Zero, and me and my brother, I started doing stuff with my brother. We did Vanilla Ice and Channel Zero, and so that started happening, and I just had this great run doing music videos. And then when that ended, at a certain point, I got connected. Somebody told me it was Caves from the Lords of Brooklyn.
All right.
Caves from the Lords of Brooklyn said, "Hey man, you got to see what's going on out in Brooklyn with these guys riding the street bikes and all that." And because he knew that me and my brother did extreme sports stuff, you know, and we went and he showed me this video of these guys in Brooklyn riding motorcycles in the streets, and it was like, wow, what's going on here? Like, and they were white kids, they were Italian kids, and I was like, whoa. And I was like, we need to make a documentary of this. And so that's what put the film 12 O'Clock into motion. And so we did the film 12 O'Clock, which turnkeyed the sport of street bike freestyle. And then, you know, we split with Caves, and I went on to do the whole Urban Street Bike Warrior series of films. I did 9 films in 7 years. And I also directed the MTV True Life episode, I Live to Ride.
Yeah.
So then I had a whole nother run, you know, doing extreme sports films for 7 years. And then when that came to an end, eventually I reconnected with some of the old Boston hardcore people, and I did the Boston hardcore film. And then eventually, you know, that led into the Michael Lago film and the New York Hardcore Chronicles.
Let me ask you a question.
Ha!
Wow, that was a nice.
Those were the...
He covered it.
And a lot of bullshit in between.
Yeah, but that's not bad.
But that's the story. So,
Yeah,
you know.
my thing is this, right? With MTV, now MTV really does not show videos anymore. They've become a reality show vehicle. You know, they really have. And it's almost funny to me that they even have an award show, an awards video show, the VMAs. I'm like, when do you play fucking videos, dude?
Yeah.
Did you, when you were dealing with MTV, or, you know, when you had videos on MTV, and when that, basically when they stopped making it, how did you feel about that? It's just like, I mean, obviously the videos get played anywhere. Now with YouTube and other fucking mediums, they come across still. But with MTV, they had that niche there, especially like when the Biohazard thing blew up.
Oh, yeah.
When the Biohazard thing blew up, 2 different things happened. First off, got to give Biohazard props for bringing New York hardcore up a step.
Absolutely.
Which they did do. They did help a lot of bands out.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, they brought in the Yo Boy Wigger thing in a sense.
Yep.
Kids from like upstate New York or
Yep.
Rock, or you know, or New Jersey, like when you're from the cul-de-sac, you best watch your back. You know, and all of a sudden, every kid from like suburbia thought like, "Yo, I'm hard," and it was just like, and then you know they'd go to a show and find out, you know, they're not some real people. Like,
Yeah, it was, yeah.
there was a bit of a, you know, it's kind of like the whole thing. People believe what they see on TV. You know,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
You know, for better or for worse, but that's kind of like a mindset that that you sometimes sort of have. You know, you see it nowadays with reality shows, and everyone thinks they can be famous for their 15 minutes or whatever it was,
Right.
and
Well, I think that I'm talking about this era that I like to refer to as the golden age of music videos.
Yeah.
It was the golden era, the golden era of music videos and guerrilla style filmmaking, which is what
Yeah.
we did. In the Biohazard video going over the Brooklyn Bridge, we didn't have a permit for that. We showed up on a Sunday morning and fucking blasted across the bridge. We did renegade, radical shit. Anything went. It was the golden age of fucking music videos. It was an exciting, vibrant time. And those videos were full of creativity and super exciting. And I was a part of that.
Yeah.
And not just in the videos that went through my company, but I was a assistant director and a second AD on Eric B. and Rakim Follow the Leader, Eric B. and Rakim Microphone Fiend, you know, just I worked on early hip hop videos, Salt and Pepper Shoop Shoop, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, so I was around like for all that stuff. It was very exciting, and I think that by the time that sort of was waning, you know, I was cycling out of it a little bit. Like you can't do music videos forever.
No.
You know what I mean? And you know, when that sort of ended and MTV, you know, things were changing, you know, and
They did.
it wasn't like I was hanging on trying to keep doing music videos. The budgets were getting smaller, you know. And
what was the biggest budget you worked for on a video?
if I remember correctly, the biggest budget video that we did at the time was Onyx Shifting. It was a 3-day shoot, and I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of about $100,000 at the time.
Right.
And
for 1990s money, that's
yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, somewhere in that neighborhood, might have been 70, 80, 90. But that was the biggest. That was a 3-day big shoot, and there was we simulated a riot on 42nd Street, and they closed down 42nd Street. I mean, that's the kind of stuff you could do back then. So it was a vibrant and exciting time.
Of course.
To do that stuff, and I'm really grateful that I was a part of that.
I want to talk about, this was your first, I guess you would say, feature length?
Yeah. Not counting the sports films, I'd say this was my
Yes,
first music doc.
Yeah, your first
Yeah.
music doc. I mean, you have done, you did the motorsport thing.
Yeah.
But me, before we, when I knew you were coming over, I was like, you know what, I really want to watch this. And unfortunately, I found it on YouTube, and I believe it had an ad on it, so some schmuck is fucking making, making a few cents on the dollar for it, which sucks. But I mean, this told a really great story. I mean, where you were able to connect with a lot of these people because you kind of grew with a lot of these people.
Yeah. I mean, being part of the early Boston hardcore scene, this film takes place, it just says it right here, a film documenting the early Boston hardcore music scene, 1981 to 1984. And that's the era that we looked at. Really, that film deals with the first wave of Boston hardcore, of which I was a part of, and of which was extremely influential. And look, I cringe a little bit regarding that film because
kind of your first dive.
Yeah, I think my style is a little embryonic, and it's really come to fruition in the last film I did. But I think there's a lot of validity there, and there's a lot of good stuff to it, and it was a great experience.
No, this was extremely enjoyable. I have
Thanks.
to say it.
Thanks.
I'm not the hugest fan of Boston hardcore. I do like the SSD first.
Yeah.
First couple things. Wasn't the big fan of DYS. Negative Effects I did like, and then later on Slapshot, of course.
But I think part of it is that my films are really about community and culture.
No, and
So one of the greatest compliments I ever got regarding this film, it was very touching, was a girl that saw the film said to me, "That film's not about Boston. That film's about my scene in my small town."
Yeah.
And that was really, she got it, it's Boston, but the stuff that this film deals with, we all experienced it in our own cities all over America.
And I agree with that.
Yeah,
I totally
and
agree
I
with
think
that.
I think as a filmmaker, that's what it's about for me. It's you want to tell a bigger story. It's not about the bands in the Boston hardcore scene. It's about the community and the culture, and that speaks to a much wider audience. To jump ahead a little bit. My other film that's out now on Netflix, Who the Fuck Is That Guy? The Fabulous Journey of Michael Lago.
Which is a fantastic film. Go watch it now.
That film is, when you break it down to the basics, it's about someone that just loves music. And that's something that a lot of us can relate to. And that's why the film speaks to so many people and why it's doing so well.
It's a fantastic story.
Yeah, it's a story.
He's had quite the life.
Yeah.
Michael Lago. He
sure.
has quite the life. He's a Queens guy.
Yeah.
He basically kind of almost like bullshitted his way into a job at Webster Hall.
Yeah.
Which it's a typical New York story.
It's great.
And then he gets to certain plateaus in his life, and you're like, it's just a great story. The Michael Lago thing I remember again, we were flipping through Netflix one morning, and it was just like, I'm like, oh, there's Who the Fuck Is That Guy fucking film. Let's fucking put it on. And we sat there.
Did you know that I directed it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I was familiar that you directed, but it was like, all right.
Let's see what this guy's got.
That.
Let's see what
I
he's
already
got.
saw this film, which we'll get into in a second.
Right.
But I was like, all right, it's like, I know what you did here. I had yet to see the all ages flick, so I was like, all right, let's see where this goes. And I was like, this is really fucking good. This is really it tells a great fucking story. The guy has had a very interesting life.
Yeah.
It hasn't been easy for him either.
No, and look, the film was in my wheelhouse. It's about a New York guy look, he's a guy that grew up in New York like us.
Us, yeah.
And I say this when I talk about the film, the Q&A and stuff, is that when I went and met with him, and I knew him a bit.
Yeah.
It wasn't, now I'm very close with him, but at the time when I first went and met with him, I was talking to him, and he said, and we were talking about stuff, I went over to his place, and he said to me, I just love music. You know? I just love music. And it was just like, wow, you know, I just love music too.
Yeah.
And I felt like it's sort of like that scene in Apocalypse Now when Dennis Hopper says, you know, and he meant it, you know? It was like that, you know? And like, it hit me, and I realized in that one fucking moment right there when he said that, it all came flooding in on me that I know who this kid is. This is the kid I went to public high school. This is the kid I went to public school with in the Bronx. I know who this kid is. I can tell the story. I know I can do this. And it was just in that moment.
Yeah, and again, great interviews. You got some really big names. Well, not that, I mean, he obviously worked with very big names.
Well, there's some bangers in there, man.
Yeah.
I mean, they're big names. Cindy,
You know what I mean?
Cindy
Besides-
Lauper.
yeah, Cyndi Lauper actually probably impressed me more than Metallica.
Cindy Lauper, the Metallica guys, Johnny Rotten, Eric Bogosian, Rob Zombie. You know, who am I forgetting? You know, those are the bangers. You know.
How long did it take you to shoot the Alago film?
The Alago film, soup to nuts, took a little longer than it should have. The Alago film, I could probably say soup to nuts was 4 years.
Really?
But it had some issues. You know, if everything was in place, if all the money was in place, and all the clearance stuff was in place, I could have done it in 2 years.
How much of a pain in the ass is it to clear music?
It's a fucking nightmare. I mean, but even with the Alago film, I was very wary of putting music in that was unclearable. So you have to be really careful when you make a film, not to be flippant about, you know.
Yeah.
I'm doing the Alago film. Believe me, I wasn't putting fucking Metallica in it because I know that clearing Metallica music is very difficult and very expensive. You know, so. Do we need the Metallica music? Really? Not really. When Jason Newsted has music and he owns his publishing and he's willing to give it to us, it sounds a lot like. I don't think there's any. You know. Correct me if it's not the case, but I don't think there's a real point in a film where you go, "Where's the Metallica music here?"
No,
it's not that kind of film.
No, it wasn't. It
Right.
wasn't. I think it was done very tasteful. It was done very classy,
Yep.
and there was nothing pretentious about it. There was nothing. It was again great story from the ground up.
Yep.
You know, and just nothing more I can say. Just go watch it, dudes.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I'm proud of it, and it being on Netflix worldwide is heavy duty. It's great.
We have this film, right? And this film basically, this film, I watched it and I was like, I like this. Obviously, there was a couple issues that people. Here's the problem with talking about New York, right? And especially with New York hardcore. I mean, this was basically based off of Tony's book, kind of. And well, you took chapters from it.
Not really, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, because
That's the first time I've ever heard that.
well,
But that's okay.
yeah, looking at Tony's book and
Right.
and to me, I always looked at it like, is this a kind of like like a companion to it almost?
Right.
Because you did things in chapters and you
Yeah.
jumped around with chapters, and the same chapters in his book, obviously.
Some of them.
Some of them,
Not all of them.
but some of them.
Yep.
And again, great. It told a nice fucking history about New York hardcore. But you know what? The problem with New York hardcore is no one is ever going to tell the full story because you can't. You'd have a fucking. It would be a fucking Fellini movie by the time you're done with 7 hours of fucking.
Well, if
film.
I could do parts 2, 3, 4, and 5, I'd probably be able to do everything.
Yeah, it's hard to condense. New York has such a rich history of music. It really does.
Yeah.
It always has,
For sure.
and because I enjoyed the film, but
Yes.
I also I've seen the comments come back, on the other side, and you have to be, you got to sort of present both sides of everything because I grew up in fucking this scene.
You're a 90s guy.
Yes.
So for you, you and your sort of like era,
Yeah.
in a certain way, and I understand that.
Yeah.
In a certain way, you're underrepresented. You're underrepresented.
Which is fine.
Representated.
Which is
in this
fine
film.
because I know, you know, it down the road it will get represented
Right,
at some
so-
point.
so-
This was mostly about the 80s, which I
Well,
kind of and not really though. But
right. So let me explain a little
Yes.
bit. This film is not the intention. This is not the history of New York hardcore, and it says it the first fucking thing in the film.
No.
This is not the history of
Yeah.
New York hardcore. This film is shot in an episodic format of episodes that are random in the film.
Yeah.
Episode 17, episode 13, and they're done in an episodic format. Originally, this was not supposed to be a film. This was supposed to be released episodically,
Really?
and it was supposed to go on indefinitely. And yes, this film has, let's say, 8 episodes in it.
Yes,
But
I believe
originally,
so.
potentially there was 20 episodes, and they were going to be released one a month for 2 years. But that started to not make its way, and it started to happen unrealistically. And I met with Vice at a certain point, and they were interested, but I didn't like
The
way-
deal?
the deal and what
Yeah.
they wanted to handle and get their people involved. So at a certain point, I had to wrestle it into this. And when I had to wrestle it into this, some hard decisions needed to be made. Part of which was other chapters
Yeah.
that were, some of them were on the board, they were partially done, and some of them were sketches, including there was an episode, there was a segment called The Age of Violence, which dealt with that era of New York hardcore, kind of the Castle Heights era, and when things got really, really violent. There was another episode called What's in the Water in Astoria, Queens, which dealt with why did all these fucking bands come from Astoria, Queens?
There's
There was
tons of them.
There was another segment that dealt with Don Fury's studio. So what happened was I had to lose it and fold some of those themes into what I had.
Got it.
So part of the Age of Violence got folded into the girls segment, which is why you hear the girls dealing with
Yeah.
So these are the hard decisions you have to make as a filmmaker. And I think inevitably in the end, I'm very proud of this film.
No, you should be.
It's right.
You
This
should
film-
be.
This film's
Proud of that film. I honestly, it for what it is, and it's a great fucking film.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a comprehensive story. Obviously, you have to tell your story in a matter of a couple hours. Like I said, if you were to sit there and just go for it, you're gonna have a fucking volume set.
Right.
You know, there's no way around it.
and I could do a part 2.
Of course you could.
I could do a part 2 and have 8 new segments in it and cover the next whole bunch of ground. And we
Yeah.
could do all this other stuff and cover the next bunch of ground.
Of course.
Is that going to happen? Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. I'm not going to make a New York Hardcore Chronicles film part 2.
No.
I'm not one to try to capture lightning in a bottle twice.
No, and I don't
You
think
know.
you should because sometimes shit like that gets corny.
That's right.
You know, it's like,
And I'm not that guy. I mean,
No,
I
you
also
shouldn't
want to
be.
move on to do other things.
you know, which in all honesty you should. Like I said, it's a good representation for the
Yeah.
most part for what
Right.
New York is about. Obviously, you know, sacrifices have to be made to tell the story.
Listen, man, I can take it.
Yeah.
I got a strong chin.
No,
I like from doing the street bike films and the music
Yeah.
videos. I know there's always a contingent of people that are not happy.
course.
But my overall attitude when it comes to stuff like this and everything else, this is my overall attitude with it. What is it you don't like? Is it the New York Hardcore Chronicles film? Is it the Boston Hardcore film? Is it the Alago film? Is it the 9 street bike films that I made? Is it one of the 50 music videos that I've been involved
Yeah.
in? Whatever it is, take a number and get at the back of the line. Because as you're critiquing one single piece of art that I have made,
Yeah.
I am out there making new art.
Of course.
And that's my fucking attitude.
No, and you should be. You should be.
And I'm proud of all the stuff I've done. But I can take criticism. I
Yeah.
understand, especially in the world we live in, man, people are going to be not happy with it. And I understand that. And I can handle it just as long as it's not personal.
Yeah.
Like, if you're going to make it personal, that's something else. But anybody can get on. You can get on the internet right now and say that this sucks, whatever. You're welcome to your opinion. But as long as it's not personal, then we get into something else. That's it.
So you have a new film. Feel like fucking. What's his name? Tom Snyder.
Right.
So Johnny Lydon. No. It's Juice. What's new?
Juice?
Juice.
You have juice here?
Juice.
We are in Forest Hills.
Yes, we are. What's next on the agenda?
The Drew Stone agenda?
Yes, on the Drew Stone agenda. You have a film that's going to be coming out
Yeah, yeah.
about
Well,
Ali.
I think
Speak about this.
I think in a way the cycle of the Michael Alago film and the New York Hardcore film is sort of coming to an end now.
Yeah.
After the summer. So really what's next for me is I have a Muhammad Ali documentary that's coming out in January on Ali's birthday. It's called Me We. And what it is my father did an Ali documentary in the 70s, shot on 16mm film. And it's a real time capsule moment in time, great film. It's a half hour, it's a short film. It's got like Jerry Lewis in it, and Phyllis Diller, and Jim Brown, and George Foreman. And it really deals with Ali and his sort of lifestyle and dealing with kids. And it's not so much of a him in the ring film, it's more of sort of like my films, like, you know, lifestyle, community and culture. So my dad did this film, and in the 70s, in 1976, it ran about 8 times on HBO. When HBO was a box where you press the button, you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And, I mean, you know, you're a Yorkville guy, right?
Yeah, we stole cable.
Yeah, so it was HBO in 76 was a box with a button, and you get HBO and you press it. And so my dad's film screened, I think, about 8 times in 1976, which was cool, and it really put my dad on the map in a certain regard, because after that he did a lot of stuff with celebrities and commercials and stuff. And then it went into a draw for 40 years. And then recently, my dad gave me the film. And at that same time, basically, the success of the New York Hardcore Chronicles film and the Alago film, with the distribution I had, I was talking to them, and I asked them, you know, what does very well for you guys? And they told me sports films. I said, wow, it just so happens I have, you know, an old, pretty cool film that hasn't been seen in 40 years, and they were interested, and we struck a deal. So in January, the film's called Me We, and it's going to be released on iTunes and on Amazon. And I took the film and I did a new film to tape transfer and a color correction and new audio mix, and I modernized it a little bit. And so, you know, my name's on it as an executive producer from executive producer Drew Stone is Ali Me We, and we're going to launch it in January with some screenings.
All right.
I think we're going to do a screening here in New York, and what I'm toying with is maybe doing a screening in New York in a cool venue, and I might have like a Q&A with New York hardcore guys that love boxing. Like maybe a Q&A with like Craig Satari, Gavin, Danny from Biohazard, and to tie it in with that stuff that we love.
Yes.
And so that's coming out, and then beyond that, I have a few other balls in the air that I'm that I'm working on and you know trying to just trying to solidify just a few things. I'm not sure if it makes sense to kind of talk about projects that may or may not happen, because I'm like the kind of guy, which I'm sure you noticed, like I don't like to talk about what I'm going to do. I like to talk about what I'm doing. And the New York hardcore film, nobody really connected that I was doing it until it went public and I couldn't avoid it anymore.
Yeah.
The Alago film, was I like to get things going to a certain point, and that's just how I do stuff. Musically, maybe in the future we'll do some more Antidote shows. I don't know. I'm really wrapped up in being a filmmaker right now. And Antidote had a nice run for a few years, and we played a bunch of great shows, and I think a lot of people got to see us. We did stuff that we never did before, we went to Europe, we went, you know, out to the West Coast, and we played some real big shows here in New York. And I sort of feel like there's not a real urgency to having to, like, you know, stop my momentum with being a filmmaker to do antidote shows. I can wait another year or two, you know, until another Black and Blue Bowl or something cool. You know what I mean? Like, those things are fun to get it together for.
Well, it's kind of like I always say, like, I love doing music, but then life gets in the way.
Yeah.
And film is your life.
Film's my life. Art is my life. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a musician. I'm doing some shows with this Drew Stone Hit Squad thing that I'm doing, which I really enjoy doing. It's like Americana, blues, hardcore, and punk in an acoustic format.
I've seen it. It makes sense.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's fun.
And I enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy playing guitar and being engaged and playing these songs that I love. You know, we've been recording. It's a long process. You know, so that's moving ahead. And I'm also, something else is, I'm working on a New York Hardcore Chronicles book.
Really?
It's called the New York Hardcore Chronicles Volume 1, 1980 to 1989. It's the first, you know, basically 10 years. And what it is flyers from that era. We take a flyer, and like what we would do is, like, for instance, you have a flyer like this. So what we would do is we would have someone give us a little oral, some oral history. So here's the flyer, and then we'd have someone give us someone from Burn sort of give a comment on it. We'd have the artist give a comment on it. We'd have a guy from Fahrenheit give a comment on the club, so we'd have like different sort of aspects of it. So it goes from the first volume is 80 through 89, and it's all flyers with people. Someone will give a take on the neighborhood back then, on the band, on the show, on the flyer, on some beef that broke out in front of the club, on you know, in general.
Yeah.
And
so it's, in other words, a little oral history connected to what happened around this show.
Specifically, these shows, these flyers. And it also comes from the New York Hardcore Chronicles page that has, you know, almost 90,000 people on it. Mm-hmm. And since there's been just such a wealth of collected material with the flyers and everything, I just thought, you know, people out there, and due to the success of the New York Hardcore Chronicles film, people are still hungry for more and want to hear more. And I feel, to a certain extent, that I sort of have the ability to bring people together in that regard, and so that's moving ahead. And there's some people that are interested in putting it out, and we'll see. And that's, you know, that sounds cool, you know, and maybe you can contribute to it.
I'll fucking put my 2 cents in.
Yeah, no,
I got a big fucking mouth.
Well, I think I think I got to double check, but I think there's a Fahrenheit's on one of the flyers or two.
Well,
when did you start playing?
95.
Oh, 95.
Yeah.
Well, the next volume,
Volume 2,
is all about your shit, dude. So, and that said, also we have the Ray B show coming up in the park.
You know, come down, support. Ray B was a great guy.
Yeah.
You
You
know.
have any recollections of him or
Ray?
Yeah.
I knew a bunch of the guys in the band. I was actually asked to play in Warzone twice. I turned it down as well.
There you go.
You know, just because I was so into doing my own thing at the time with bands I was in at that time, I just, you know, not to sound crazy, but I just didn't want to play other people's music.
Sure.
I was creating my own art, I guess you could say, and that's what I wanted to do. And, you know, I respectfully turned it down twice, once in 1993, once in 1995.
I understand that.
But great guy, he looked out for me and my bands back in the day, and, you know, just a fantastic dude. You know, it was kind of a shock when he when he went. And
He passed away young.
yeah, he did. And just terrible situation. I mean, I went up to that wake, and it was hard for me just to go up front and pay my respects, because it's like, you know, first time I knew someone in the hardcore scene that had, you know, someone I had actually known and had respect for pass, and I was just like, oh, this is fucked up.
Yeah, that's always tough. Yeah.
You know, it was really, really tough, and unfortunately, since then, I've been to quite a few more.
Yeah.
As we get older, things catch up on people.
Well, October 1st, we're doing the show in Tompkins Square Park. We did the Dr. No benefit last year, and we're doing it again in the park. War Zone with Todd Youth and Todd the Kid and Vinny and Jay, and they're gonna with a bunch of guest singers.
Yeah.
We're gonna be announcing them, starting this week. A Kill Your Idols reunion.
Shutdown reunion.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. A Kill Your Idols show and a Shutdown reunion.
Regulate.
Regulate, who I
It's a
love.
brand new
Love
fucking.
that
Well, not
band.
brand new, but they're fairly recent.
And
they're doing it.
Fireburn.
Yes, and
Which
this is their
is-
first New York show, I believe.
Yeah, the singer is Israel, who sang on the Bad Brains Rise record, and they're fucking smoking.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a really, really fun day.
Yeah.
And, come on out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll all be down there, guys.
Let's just hope for good weather,
Yeah.
October 1st,
Anything can happen.
Yeah, well, it should be fine.
Yeah.
Rain or shine.
If you get wet, you get wet. Big fucking deal.
Don't be a fucking
Pussy, man.
Don't get
Drew,
that way.
it was a pleasure,
Thank you.
man.
Thanks
Thank
for
you very
having me.
much.
I really appreciate it. And thanks for the support, everybody. And www.stonefilmsnyc.com or www.thenewyorkhardcorechroniclesfilm.com. And if you're on Facebook, the New York Hardcore Chronicles Facebook page. So thanks a lot.